Elena Martinez walked through the gates of Ramstein Air Base with her head held high, despite the whispers that followed her every step. At 28, she was the youngest communications specialist ever assigned to NATO's most critical European outpost. Her small frame and quiet demeanor made her an easy target for the seasoned military personnel who dominated the base. The German morning was crisp as she made her way to the communications center, a massive concrete building that housed the most advanced radar and satellite systems in Europe. Her supervisor, Colonel Harrison, barely looked up from his coffee when she entered the briefing room. "Martinez, you'll be working the night shift in Sector 7, he said, pointing to a corner desk surrounded by outdated equipment. "Try not to break anything important." The other technicians snickered. Sergeant Davies, a burly man with 15 years of experience, shook his head openly. "They're really scraping the bottom of the barrel these days," he muttered to his colleague. "What's next? Sending kindergarten kids to monitor Russian airspace." Elena had heard it all before. At her previous assignment in Nevada, they called her Mouse because she was so quiet. Here at Ramstein, the nicknames were less kind. Little Girl was the favorite, though some preferred Mistake when they thought she wasn't listening. Her workstation was isolated from the main command center, tucked away where the important decisions weren't made. The equipment was older, the screens smaller, and the assignments less critical. While the senior staff monitored active flight patterns and coordinated with Pentagon officials, Elena was tasked with routine maintenance checks and monitoring low-priority communication channels. But Elena didn't complain. She arrived early every day, stayed late when needed, and studied every manual she could get her hands on. During her lunch breaks, she would sit alone in the cafeteria, reading technical journals about new radar technologies and signal processing improvements. The other personnel would walk past her table, sometimes making jokes about the bookworm, who thought she knew better than everyone else. Master Sergeant Williams was particularly harsh. A 20-year veteran with multiple deployments, he made it his personal mission to remind Elena of her place. "This isn't some college computer lab, Martinez," he would say, whenever she suggested a different approach to a problem. "This is real military work. Maybe you should stick to filing reports and leave the important stuff to the professionals." The weeks turned into months, and the mockery became routine. During briefings, her questions were dismissed with eye rolls. Her suggestions for improving outdated protocols were met with condescending explanations about how things had always been done this way. When equipment malfunctioned, she was often blamed, even when the problems existed long before her arrival. Elena's living quarters were in a small dormitory on the edge of the base. Her roommate, Sarah Chen, was one of the few people who treated her with basic respect. Sarah worked in logistics and had watched Elena endure the daily humiliation. "I don't understand why you put up with it," Sarah said one evening as Elena reviewed technical specifications at her desk. "You're smarter than half those guys, and you work twice as hard." Elena looked up from her papers, adjusting her glasses. "Proving yourself takes time in the military," she replied quietly. "I knew it wouldn't be easy when I chose this path." What nobody knew was that Elena had graduated top of her class from MIT's electrical engineering program before enlisting. She had turned down lucrative offers from tech companies to serve her country. Her specialty in advanced signal processing and her understanding of modern warfare communications were skills the military desperately needed, but her youth and gender made it difficult for the old guard to take her seriously. The base's communication systems were a mixture of cutting-edge technology and legacy equipment that dated back decades. Elena quickly noticed inefficiencies and potential vulnerabilities that the senior staff either ignored or failed to recognize. She documented everything in detailed reports that gathered dust on supervisors' desks. One particular system caught her attention: the early warning radar network that monitored Eastern European airspace. The system relied on outdated software that had been patched countless times over the years. Elena identified several critical weaknesses in the network's ability to distinguish between friendly aircraft and potential threats, especially during periods of heavy air traffic or electronic interference. She brought her concerns to Colonel Harrison during a routine meeting. "Sir, I've identified some potential issues with our radar discrimination protocols," she began, spreading out charts and technical diagrams on his desk. Harrison glanced at the papers for less than 30 seconds. "Martinez, these systems have been protecting NATO airspace for decades. I think our engineers know what they're doing better than someone fresh out of training. But, sir, the software vulnerabilities could allow hostile aircraft to—" "That's enough," Harrison interrupted. "Your job is to monitor routine communications, not redesign our entire defense network. Stick to what you know." Elena gathered her papers and left the office, feeling the familiar sting of dismissal. Outside in the hallway, she passed Davies and Williams, who had clearly overheard the conversation. "Did you hear that?" Davies laughed. "The rookie thinks she's going to revolutionize NATO defense with her little computer printouts." Williams shook his head with mock concern. "Someone should tell her this isn't a video game. Real military systems are built by people who actually know what they're doing." Despite the constant ridicule, Elena continued her work with unwavering dedication. She memorized every frequency, every protocol, every piece of equipment in her section. During quiet night shifts, she would run diagnostic tests on systems that others had neglected, often finding minor issues that could become major problems if left unchecked. Her attention to detail saved the base from several minor incidents. She caught a failing backup generator before it could leave the communications center without emergency power. She identified interference patterns that were disrupting secure communications with Washington. She even discovered that a routine software update had inadvertently disabled several safety protocols. But each time she reported these findings, the credit went elsewhere. Senior technicians would review her work, confirm her discoveries, and then present the solutions as their own. Elena watched quietly as Davies received commendation for identifying critical system vulnerabilities that she had actually discovered weeks earlier. The isolation was wearing on her. During base social events, she was either ignored completely or invited to conversations only to be the target of jokes about her appearance or experience. The few times she tried to contribute to discussions about technical matters, she was quickly shut down by comments about staying in her lane or learning from the experts. Elena found solace in her work, diving deeper into the complex systems that protected one of NATO's most important installations. She began to understand the base's operations better than many people who had been there for years. She memorized flight schedules, knew the communication patterns of different aircraft, and could identify potential problems in radar signatures that others might miss. But understanding the systems also made her increasingly aware of their limitations. The radar network had blind spots that could be exploited. The communication protocols had encryption weaknesses that sophisticated adversaries might penetrate. The automated threat assessment programs relied on algorithms that hadn't been updated to account for modern stealth technologies. Elena documented everything, creating comprehensive reports that detailed both the problems and potential solutions. She proposed software updates, hardware modifications, and new protocols that could significantly improve the base's security and efficiency. Her reports were thorough, well-researched, and backed by extensive technical analysis. They were also completely ignored. Colonel Harrison filed her reports without reading them. The senior technicians dismissed her suggestions without consideration. Even when she tried to explain her concerns to individual colleagues, they responded with patronizing lectures about military hierarchy and the importance of following established procedures. The mockery intensified as Elena's reputation as an overeager know-it-all spread throughout the base. People began making jokes about the little genius who thought she was smarter than everyone else. Some suggested that her constant reports and suggestions were just attempts to get attention or advance her career faster than she deserved. Elena persevered through sheer determination. She had joined the military to serve her country and protect innocent people. The personal cost was high, but she believed that her work mattered, even if nobody else recognized its value. She continued to monitor her assigned systems, document problems, and propose solutions, hoping that eventually someone would take her seriously. What she didn't know was that several thousand miles away, intelligence agencies were tracking unusual activity along NATO's eastern borders. Sophisticated aircraft with advanced stealth capabilities had been conducting reconnaissance missions, testing the alliance's air defense systems. The very vulnerabilities that Elena had identified were being systematically explored by potential adversaries who understood that modern warfare often began with electronic infiltration rather than direct attack. The stage was being set for a crisis that would test everything Elena had learned, everything she had tried to warn others about, and everything she believed about her duty to protect the people who had spent months treating her as nothing more than an inconvenience. The night shift on October 15th started like any other for Elena. She arrived at the communications center at 11:30 p.m., 30 minutes early as always, to review the day's reports and check system status. The base was quiet, except for the distant hum of generators and the occasional roar of aircraft engines from the flight line. Elena settled into her workstation and began her routine checks. The radar displays showed normal air traffic patterns across European airspace. Commercial flights followed their assigned corridors, military aircraft conducted scheduled training exercises, and the automated systems processed thousands of data points every second without issue. But something felt different tonight. Elena had developed an intuition for the subtle rhythms of the communication networks, and there were small irregularities that others might dismiss as random electronic noise. Certain frequencies were experiencing intermittent interference. Some radar returns were appearing and disappearing in patterns that seemed almost too organized to be natural phenomena. At 1:45 a.m., Elena noticed the first clear anomaly. A brief radar contact appeared near the Polish border, moving at high speed before vanishing completely. The automated system classified it as a weather disturbance, but Elena wasn't convinced. The signature was too clean, too precise for atmospheric interference. She pulled up the raw data files and began analyzing the signal characteristics. What she found made her blood run cold. The radar return showed stealth technology signatures similar to advanced aircraft that weren't supposed to exist in that airspace. The contact had appeared just long enough to test how quickly NATO's systems could detect and track it before disappearing again. Elena immediately called the main command center. Sergeant Davies answered with obvious irritation. "What do you want, Martinez? Some of us are trying to work here." "I'm seeing unusual radar contacts near Sector 7, Elena explained quickly. "The signatures don't match any known aircraft types, and they're exhibiting stealth characteristics." Davies sighed audibly. "Look, rookie, we get false contacts all the time. Weather, birds, equipment glitches. That's why we have experienced people to filter out the nonsense." "But the signal patterns suggest, Martinez, I've been doing this job since before you graduated high school. Trust me when I say I know the difference between a real threat and computer static. Now stop bothering us with every little blip on your screen." The line went dead. Elena stared at her monitors, feeling the familiar frustration of being dismissed. But this time, the stakes felt higher. Something was definitely wrong, even if she couldn't convince anyone else to take it seriously. Over the next hour, Elena detected 3 more anomalous contacts. Each one appeared briefly in different sectors before vanishing, always just long enough to test NATO's detection capabilities. The pattern was systematic, methodical, like someone was conducting a detailed survey of the air defense network's blind spots and response times. Elena began documenting everything with the same thoroughness she applied to all her work. She recorded exact times, coordinates, signal characteristics, and flight patterns. She cross-referenced the data with known aircraft schedules and weather reports. Every analysis pointed to the same conclusion. Unknown aircraft with advanced stealth capabilities were systematically probing NATO's defenses. At 3:20 a.m., Elena tried calling the command center again. This time, Master Sergeant Williams answered. "This better be important, Martinez. We're tracking actual aircraft out here, not chasing ghosts." "Sir, I have clear evidence of unauthorized aircraft conducting reconnaissance of our radar network," Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady and professional. "The pattern suggests coordinated intelligence gathering by hostile forces." Williams laughed harshly. "Hostile forces? Are you living in some kind of action movie? This is real life, not a Tom Clancy novel. Whatever you think you're seeing, it's not enemy aircraft. Trust me, if there were real threats in our airspace, we'd be the first to know." Elena tried to explain her analysis, but Williams cut her off. "Let me give you some free advice, kid. Stop trying to find problems where they don't exist. Your job is to monitor routine communications, not play intelligence analyst. Leave the real work to people who know what they're doing." The dismissal stung, but Elena couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. She continued monitoring her systems, documenting every anomaly, every suspicious signal, every piece of evidence that supported her growing conviction that NATO was under systematic surveillance. At 4:15 a.m., Elena's worst fears began to materialize. Her monitors suddenly lit up with multiple radar contacts appearing simultaneously across a wide front. Unlike the earlier probing missions, these aircraft made no attempt to hide their presence. They were flying in formation, moving fast, and heading directly toward NATO airspace. Elena's hands flew across her keyboard as she tried to analyze the developing situation. The aircraft signatures were unlike anything in NATO databases. They exhibited stealth characteristics far beyond anything she had seen before, but they were no longer trying to remain hidden. Whatever operation they had been planning was now beginning. This time, Elena didn't bother calling the command center. She activated the emergency alert system that connected directly to Colonel Harrison's office and the base commander. Within seconds, alarm sirens began wailing across Ramstein Air Base. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The quiet night shift transformed into controlled chaos as personnel rushed to their battle stations. Fighter aircraft began launching from the flight line, their engines screaming as they climbed toward the unknown contacts. The command center became a hive of activity as senior officers tried to understand what they were facing. Colonel Harrison burst into the communications center, still buttoning his uniform jacket. His face was flushed with anger and confusion. "Martinez, what the hell is going on? Why did you activate the emergency systems?" Elena turned from her monitors, her voice calm despite the sirens blaring overhead. "Sir, we have multiple unidentified aircraft approaching NATO airspace. They've been conducting reconnaissance of our radar network for the past several hours. I believe this is a coordinated attack." Harrison stared at the displays showing the incoming aircraft. Other senior personnel were gathering around Elena's workstation, studying data that they had ignored when she tried to present it hours earlier. Davies and Williams pushed through the crowd, their faces pale as they realized the magnitude of what was unfolding. "How long have you been tracking these contacts?" Harrison demanded. "The reconnaissance phase began at approximately 1:45 a.m., Elena replied, pulling up her meticulously documented logs. "I identified systematic probing of our radar coverage, flight pattern analysis, and response time testing. I reported my concerns multiple times, but was told they were false alarms." The room fell silent except for the wailing sirens and the crackle of radio communications. Senior officers were frantically trying to coordinate with other NATO installations, fighter squadrons, and command authorities. The mysterious aircraft were now clearly visible on every radar system, their advanced capabilities making them difficult to track but impossible to ignore. General Morrison, the base commander, arrived with his staff and immediately took control of the situation. "How many aircraft are we tracking?" he barked. "At least 12 confirmed contacts, sir," Elena responded when nobody else answered immediately. "Possibly more using advanced stealth technology that's making them difficult to count accurately." Morrison turned to Elena with surprise. "You're the technician who activated the alert?" "Yes, sir." "How long have you been aware of this threat?" Elena met his gaze steadily. "I've been tracking reconnaissance activities for several hours, sir. The attack formation appeared approximately 10 minutes ago." Morrison's expression darkened as he processed this information. He turned to Colonel Harrison with obvious anger. "Why wasn't I informed of potential hostile activity hours ago?" Harrison opened his mouth, but no words came out. Davies and Williams, who had dismissed Elena's warnings so confidently, were now studying the radar displays with growing horror. The evidence of their failure was undeniable, displayed on screens throughout the command center. Elena continued working at her station, coordinating with air traffic control and providing tactical updates to the fighter squadrons scrambling to intercept the unknown aircraft. Her calm professionalism under pressure was a stark contrast to the panic and confusion among the senior staff who had spent months undermining her credibility. The base's defensive systems were now fully activated. Surface-to-air missile batteries were tracking potential targets. Fighter aircraft were climbing toward intercept positions. NATO command centers across Europe were implementing emergency protocols based on Elena's initial alert. As the crisis deepened, it became clear that Elena's early warning had provided crucial minutes that might mean the difference between successful defense and catastrophic surprise attack. The very systems she had tried to warn others about were now being tested under real combat conditions. Master Sergeant Williams approached Elena's workstation, his earlier arrogance replaced by grudging respect. "Martinez, we need your analysis of these aircraft capabilities. You seem to understand their technology better than anyone else here." Elena didn't waste time on recriminations. The base was under potential attack, and personal grievances were irrelevant. She began briefing the combat staff on everything she had learned about the mysterious aircraft, their tactics, and the vulnerabilities they had been systematically exploiting. But even as Elena worked to coordinate the defense of Ramstein Air Base, she knew this crisis was far from over. The systematic reconnaissance suggested a level of planning and sophistication that went far beyond a simple probe of NATO defenses. Something much larger was unfolding, and her small corner of the communications center had somehow become the focal point of a confrontation that could reshape the balance of power in Europe. The next 6 hours transformed Elena Martinez from the base's most ignored technician into the central figure in NATO's response to the most sophisticated aerial intrusion in the alliance's history. As fighter jets streaked across European skies and missile defense systems tracked dozens of unknown aircraft, Elena found herself briefing generals, coordinating international responses, and making split-second decisions that affected the safety of millions. The mysterious aircraft had revealed capabilities that exceeded NATO's worst-case scenarios. They could appear and disappear from radar at will, suggesting stealth technology years ahead of anything Western intelligence believed existed. More troubling, they seemed to know exactly where NATO's defensive blind spots were located, flying through gaps in coverage with surgical precision. General Morrison established a crisis command center around Elena's workstation. Top military officials from across Europe participated in video conferences, all focused on understanding the threat that only she had been tracking from the beginning. Her detailed logs of the reconnaissance activities became crucial intelligence for planning NATO's response. "Specialist Martinez," General Morrison said during a briefing with Pentagon officials, "your analysis suggests these aircraft have been studying our defenses for weeks, possibly months. How long do you estimate they've been conducting surveillance? Elena reviewed her accumulated data, cross-referencing anomalies she had documented but been unable to explain. Based on patterns I can now identify retroactively, sir, I believe systematic reconnaissance began at least 6 weeks ago. The activity was subtle enough to avoid triggering automated alerts, but consistent enough to map our entire defensive network. The implications were staggering. For over a month, unknown forces had been systematically studying NATO's most sensitive installations, learning response times, identifying vulnerabilities, and preparing for what appeared to be a coordinated operation across multiple countries. Elena's early warnings had potentially prevented a catastrophic intelligence breach or worse. Colonel Harrison, who had dismissed Elena's concerns just hours earlier, now found himself sidelined as higher-ranking officers took direct control of the situation. The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The little girl they had mocked was now providing briefings to NATO's supreme commander, while seasoned veterans struggled to understand the technology they were facing. As dawn broke over Ramstein, the scope of the crisis became clear. Similar incidents were being reported at NATO installations across Europe. Advanced aircraft had simultaneously probed defenses in Poland, the Baltic states, Romania, and Germany. The coordination suggested a massive intelligence operation that had been years in the planning. Elena worked without rest, analyzing signal patterns, coordinating with interceptor aircraft, and trying to predict where the mysterious aircraft might appear next. Her understanding of the radar system's limitations proved invaluable as NATO forces attempted to track targets that conventional wisdom said should be untrackable. The aircraft are exploiting specific vulnerabilities in our radar overlap zones, Elena explained to a room full of colonels and generals. They appear to have detailed maps of our coverage patterns and are using them to avoid detection during critical phases of flight. Davies and Williams, who had spent months belittling Elena's expertise, now found themselves taking orders from the woman they had called incompetent. The reversal was complete when Elena was temporarily promoted to acting communications coordinator, giving her authority over personnel who outranked her just days earlier. The crisis reached its peak when Elena detected what appeared to be a coordinated attack formation approaching multiple NATO installations simultaneously. This wasn't reconnaissance anymore. It was the beginning of something much more serious. Elena's voice remained calm as she coordinated responses across a dozen countries, but everyone in the command center could feel the weight of the moment. "All stations, this is Ramstein Actual," Elena broadcast on the emergency frequency. "We have confirmed hostile formation, bearing 270, altitude Angels 30, estimated time to target 15 minutes. All defensive systems to full readiness." Fighter aircraft from 6 countries converged on the incoming formation. Surface-to-air missile batteries locked onto targets. For several tense minutes, it appeared that Europe was on the brink of its first major aerial combat since World War II. Then, as suddenly as they had appeared, the unknown aircraft vanished. Not just from radar, but completely, as if they had never existed. The formation that had been approaching NATO airspace simply disappeared, leaving no trace except the electronic signatures Elena had been so carefully documenting. The aftermath was swift and dramatic. Elena found herself at the center of an international investigation into the security breach. Intelligence agencies from multiple countries wanted to debrief her. Military commanders sought her recommendations for improving defensive systems. Politicians demanded explanations for how such a sophisticated operation could have gone undetected for so long. General Morrison personally commended Elena for her vigilance and professionalism. Specialist Martinez, "Your early warning and expert analysis potentially prevented a catastrophic intelligence breach. Your actions tonight exemplify the highest traditions of military service." The transformation in how others treated Elena was immediate and profound. Colleagues who had mocked her now sought her opinions on technical matters. Senior officers who had dismissed her suggestions now requested detailed reports on system improvements. The woman they had called Mistake was now being hailed as the person who saved NATO from its greatest security failure in decades. Colonel Harrison, facing an investigation into his failure to respond to Elena's warnings, offered a grudging apology. Martinez, I clearly underestimated your capabilities and judgment. Your persistent reporting may have saved this installation and others from serious compromise. Elena accepted the acknowledgement gracefully, but her focus remained on the larger implications of what had occurred. The mysterious aircraft had demonstrated capabilities that suggested adversaries were far more advanced than NATO had assumed. The systematic reconnaissance indicated long-term planning for operations that might still be in development. Over the following weeks, Elena worked with international intelligence teams to analyze every aspect of the intrusion. Her detailed documentation proved invaluable in understanding adversary capabilities and intentions. The patterns she had identified led to discoveries of similar activities at installations worldwide, revealing the scope of what intelligence officials now called the most sophisticated espionage operation in modern history. Elena was promoted to staff sergeant and transferred to NATO's cybersecurity division, where her expertise in detecting subtle electronic signatures became crucial for identifying future threats. The woman who had been mocked for her youth and inexperience became one of the alliance's most trusted experts on advanced threat detection. The personnel who had spent months undermining Elena faced various consequences for their failures. Davies was reassigned to a desk job after an investigation revealed he had ignored multiple legitimate security concerns. Williams took early retirement rather than face a formal review of his leadership failures. Colonel Harrison was transferred to a training position where his inability to recognize talent could do less damage. Elena never forgot the lessons of those difficult months at Ramstein. The experience taught her that competence often threatens those who rely on authority rather than ability, that persistence in the face of dismissal can save lives, and that the most dangerous threats often come from directions that conventional wisdom considers impossible. Years later, when Elena became one of NATO's youngest intelligence directors, she implemented policies ensuring that concerns from any personnel, regardless of rank or experience, received serious consideration. She established systems for identifying and developing overlooked talent, particularly among those who didn't fit traditional military stereotypes. The night that changed everything at Ramstein became a case study taught at military academies worldwide. Future officers learned about the importance of listening to all personnel, the dangers of dismissing expertise based on assumptions, and the value of meticulous attention to detail in identifying emerging threats. Elena's story spread throughout NATO as an example of how individual dedication and competence could protect entire nations. The young woman who had endured months of mockery became a symbol of military professionalism and the importance of valuing substance over appearance. But Elena's greatest satisfaction didn't come from recognition or promotion. It came from knowing that her vigilance had protected innocent people and that her persistence had proven the value of giving everyone a chance to contribute to something larger than themselves. The sirens that had exploded across the flight line that October night had announced not just a crisis, but the emergence of a leader who would help shape NATO's defenses for decades to come. The mysterious aircraft never returned, but their brief appearance had exposed vulnerabilities that took years to address. Elena's detailed analysis became the foundation for new defensive technologies and protocols that strengthened the alliance against future threats. The woman they had mocked had become the architect of systems that would protect Europe for generations. Elena Martinez had proven that competence, dedication, and courage matter more than rank, experience, or the opinions of those who mistake volume for wisdom. In a world where the most serious threats often come from the least expected directions, she had shown that the most valuable defenders might be those whom others are quickest to dismiss.